Welcome to Building Beyond, a space to connect with remarkable guests who meld ancestral wisdom with both ancient and emerging technologies, showing us how to design and build the world we want to live in today, beyond what we're told is possible. I'm your host, Pera.
And I'm your host, Erika Casasola.
And I invite you to join us, to imagine what could be, to get inspired, and to start building beyond together.
Hi, Erika.
Hey, Lee.
Nice to see you. Welcome, everyone. We wanted to start our first Building Beyond podcast with an introduction to who we are. We both have titles for our work in the world, which oftentimes people get confused by. I get asked all the time if I study rocks because I'm a geographer, but I actually know nothing about rocks.
Yeah, and as a curandera, they're like, do you only do spells or something like that? Which, no, that's not what I do. So we thought we would just explain, right? Lee, what is a geographer before we continue?
Well, what drew me to geography was that it's a discipline that studies physical sciences, social sciences, culture. A lot of times people think of geographers that you just know the state capital, but it's so much more than that. It's looking at why the landscapes look the way they do from both human and environmental forces. We also use technology a lot to make maps and to analyze data. And so for me, it was a very holistic way to address issues and look at issues in the world because as geographers, we ask the why of where. Why does some process or something exist in one location and it looks different someplace else? And I grew up around the world. My parents taught at international schools. And so I was introduced to other ways of living and knowing and being based on where I was. And I think that just instilled in me this desire to examine all of that from an academic discipline. I just feel like geography is in me, I guess.
Nice. Look at that. You gave the why. Also, why are you a geographer?
Yeah. So tell
Yeah.
us what a curandera does, Erika.
Thank you. And so curanderes, also I like to add to that, right? So there's many types, like you said, and they call it different things in many other different cultures. So in the Mexica tradition that I went taught, one of the traditions I was taught in is there's hueseros, people who work with bones. There's herbalists, los hierberos. There's also the energy healers. That's me. I work with energy to help you move through traumas that we've had in our lives before they manifest as an illness into your body, uh, hoping to get there before it gets to your body. But if it does get there, then I use tools from many different traditions. I use crystal healing, the Mexica tradition with copal and herbs, and then the plática corazonada is another tradition also with Mexica suena corazonada when I talk through conversation. So that's the curandera that I am. I like to call myself a hybrid, sanadora, because I use all these types of medicine and I merge them together with one purpose, which is to help the person that comes to see me release.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And how did you get set on the path of curanderismo? Because I think that will lead us into partly what we'll be talking about in these podcasts moving forward.
So I was about 7 years old. I was playing outside, and there's this elder that approached me, and she told me, "You have something," and I'm like, "What?" And I have a twin sister, and she asked me, "You have a twin sister, don't you?" And I'm like, "Yes." She told me, "Okay, go get a red thread and a needle." She told me, "Tell the needle to say yes and tell the needle to say no." And so the needle said yes and then said no. So little did I know, I was learning my first tool, which I still use to this day, which is a pendulum. And so with that, she taught me how to people that were pregnant or had a little human in their body came to me guessing the gender of that little human, and then I would tell them, and then it was pretty accurate. People would come like, "Oh my god, I did have a whatever the gender was at the moment," except there was times that it was just going circle and circle and circle, the pendulum, the needle, and I would just tell them it's both, and they were like, "What?" Little did I know, now they understand that it's queer people that they were holding within their body. So
Mm.
that's the story of that. But that's how I came to really. My mom, I grew up Mormon, and so I had to cover all that up. I couldn't practice in the open with my family. So when I came to the US around 10 years old, I had to stop practice. And not until in my 20s did I get back into it again, like firmly, and I could not leave it after that. That's how I came about it. The way I connected with Lee is because Lee does have a spiritual practice. I know you do, Lee, and that's what really gained my trust. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about for you?
Yeah. I mean, we met through your land, but
Right. No,
our
but
well,
that's what
yes,
sealed it for me, like the trust.
right. So I feel like I was always very sensitive growing up. And now that I've gone deeper into my ancestral practice, I've realized I was feeling spirits and ancestors probably my whole life and didn't really realize what it was. And it really took me losing two very important people in my life and deciding to take some time off and come back to Mexico. I had done high school here, and my mom had worked here before she had passed on. So they were having a celebration of life for her. And the pandemic hit. And so I decided to call an elder here who has a small retreat center in rural Morelos. And because I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I went there and I ended up staying 4 months. And I was pretty much totally disconnected. We didn't have any internet. I had a little bit of cell service. I was living in nature with a few other women who were hunkered down there, a couple elders, healers. And every night we would have a fire. We would have temazcal on the weekends. And one night around the fire, I felt my grandfather and he came up on my right side and I heard his voice in my ear and it said, "Listen up, we have things to teach." And it was so direct and straightforward and kind
Wow.
of brusque, like he is actually. And then the week later, someone made a joke in the temazcal that her aunt didn't know what a temazcal was and was it anything like the sauna at the gym. And everyone started laughing, like, nada que ver, nothing like it, right? And having grown up with sauna with my grandparents, I heard my grandpa like so strong, like, you need to tell them sauna is sacred, like how important it
Mhm.
is in our tradition as well as a way to connect. In fact, historically, sauna was the place you went to connect with the other side. Um,
And
and
to this.
so in the Finnish tradition, I tapped the temascalera, the elder, the abuela, on the shoulder because I was just overcome with emotion. And she turned around and saw me and she's like, "Don't worry, I see him. We'll work with this." And so we did. So I started working with her. And then I started working with another curandero who was very skilled in navigating spaces that aren't the material spaces. Let's just say that energetic spaces. And so I really started working with my ancestors and they started coming to me in dreams and meditations, giving me a lot of information. And through work with him, through work with a couple other elders here in Mexico, everyone kept on saying like you're being called, you need to return to your ancestral homelands. And it was the pandemic, and those ancestral homelands are up in Sapmi, which is Lapland, Finland, way up north in the Arctic. And I had
Mhm.
no idea how I was going to go up there. But as soon as I decided that I committed to that, everything fell into place. $300 plane ticket, invites to stay
Wow.
with people, work the reindeer roundup, stay with another man who's resuscitating the Sami spirituality. So, not just the culture, but also the spirituality. And it's when I came back from that journey, when you and I, Erika, we already knew each other, but the
Mhm.
work started becoming much clearer.
Yeah, and I think that's when you and I definitely connected once you had come back from that trip for sure.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you then how does this trip or you getting in touch with your spiritual guides, how did this shape you work after that?
Yeah, well, I feel like I get a lot of information about next steps in the work. So I think you'll remember when I came back from that trip and I was I was like, "No, what?" I thought I was just gonna be building communities. For our guests who don't know, I'm a tiny house community builder. I did that for many years. Erika and her partner contacted me because they have land and they wanted to start a community. So here I am thinking like, I'm just going to start building communities again. And I came back from that journey with a very strong knowing and message that actually I'm supposed to be helping bring ancestral wisdom and community lands into, of all things, video games, which I do not play video games or some
Yeah.
sort of gamified online environment, very digital. And I kind of freaked out because I thought I was done with my tech career, but that's where it's led me and it's quite exciting and we'll talk a little bit at the end about the work we're doing
Yeah.
right now. Yeah, I just followed the information I was getting when I was up in Sapmi. I did go to some sacred sites and ask first for permission to connect and to be
Hmm.
there, and then for guidance. And the guidance came very quickly.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't forget, but it was in the back of my mind that you and I didn't connect that strong until you came back from that trip. Because
Mhm.
I was in Mexico and then I'm like, all right, Lee, I think I'm done learning from this one teacher. Pick me up. Let's do this. And we ended up going and n- it's so strange how it happened and how this work gets started. We were sitting at a coffee shop and because we were gonna do some trade work, you were gonna help him with a website, and I was gonna
Yep.
help you maybe do a limpia later or something like that. But I don't do limpias in this clothing, right? Like I'm a traditional clothing and like all this stuff that I've been taught by my teacher. So I do follow. Estamos en Mexico. ¿Qué parte de Mexico? What side? Where were you? What
Jalapa, we
city?
were in Veracruz.
It was beautiful, and we were in a coffee shop, and then Lisa explaining to me like the visions that you've had, right?
Mhm.
I felt this energy flow through me, and then just information coming through. And I was like, "Oh my God, Lee, I think it's happening. Wow, I'm not even dressed. Here it goes.
Right?
Get
Well, you
ready." 'Cause
don't need the dress.
yes, I forget, right? Like I'm the tool. We forget that we're the tool, right?
Right.
Just the clothing on the tradition kind of helps, but to connect, right? So then Lisa's telling me, and I start seeing it like in neon lights. Things start to light up, and I see the whole thing, and I'm like, I get it. And you guys work really fast, like really fast to the point that I had to ask, like, please slow down. I need, I need to
Sorry.
see everything. So ever since then, we've been doing this work. I'm gonna ask you to please what is building beyond. I'm asking you because you're the one who came to the vision, and then, though you and I are leading this work together,
Right.
I'm asking that you brought this here.
What is it? That's a good question because as Erika said, it's a whole network, it's a system. And it really started with what happened for me during the pandemic, which is a lot of people, since I had built a tiny home community very economically in community with others, people started contacting me saying, hey, I have land. I want to do something with it. I remember back in the early days of the pandemic, everyone wanted to be in the rural areas on land, growing their own food. Can you help? And, most of these folks I knew, I know they're not rich. So I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to do this? I'm not going to ask them for money. And most of them also were on a very similar journey of either on their ancestral lands, doing ancestral work, on some sort of spiritual journey. And so I thought, well, why aren't we all just creating a network to learn from one another? Like, I have knowledge from my ancestors of how they survived for millennia in the Arctic, and other people have knowledge of, water systems, off grid water systems for arid climates. Like we should be sharing what we're learning from our own backgrounds and our own lands to create a network. And so that was one piece of it. And then last year, after Erika and I came together in Jalapa in Mexico, the story you heard, I started realizing how much, because I do work in technology and I've been learning a lot about AI and gaming and trying to research. And I realized how much of how we do ancestral work or spirit work with asking permission, having protocols, setting protections is what we should be also doing in online spaces, especially with AI.
Mm,
And that the processes were very similar. And I was finding some people talking about that, and I was getting really excited. I thought, well, at least I could start interviewing other people who are also thinking about this, right? How are we bringing these ancient technologies and our own ancestral wisdom into digital spaces, or how do we combine technology to help make that connection process easier?
Mhm.
And then once you saw it, Erika, I kind of put the podcast on hold and I said, let's start building the system. And so basically, what Building Beyond is a space for anyone who knows and remembers that there are ways to live on this earth outside of the current structures we are constrained by. And we are building a way for us to envision that collectively and then apply those visions through what we can build in gamified environments to physical community lands like Tierrita Grande, which is Erika's land, and other lands in our network, and really create a space for people to come together. Because what we found was that so many people are like, oh, but I can't do that. I don't have the money, or the zoning tells me I can't do that. And I thought, no, we have to break out. That's the current structures. And we know that there's ways to do things beyond that. So let's
Right.
move into the digital maybe and imagine, and then take those imaginings and try to apply them on physical lands. So that's kind of the best way I can describe it right now. I'm curious how you would describe Building Beyond, Erika.
To me, Building Beyond is a place where community can come together. Well, it's coming together,
Mhm.
and we can exchange information to help each other either break out or start a new way of living by sharing the knowledge that we all had for ever since we've been here. And so to me is that it's a fountain of wealth where we can all contribute, and everybody can go into that fountain, and like, oh, youth, elders, the elders can share their knowledge, and then they can take some for them too. To me, that's what Building Beyond is. Like you said, it's evolving,
Mhm.
and that's what we are in. It's a safe space where we can come and hold this ancient sacred teachings,
Yes.
technologies,
Technologies. Yes.
yeah, that we can share with people around the world who are
Mhm.
like-minded. We're here to share the knowledge and not use it in that, how do you say in English, like extract.
Extractive,
Yeah,
extractive way. Yeah. Yeah, and
yes.
so we will be sharing more as we move along this journey, how we're building that system. We've got an amazing colleague who's helping us build that, and others as well. We
Yeah.
won't get too much into the technical on this today, just because we want to keep it about the why, because the podcast will really be interviewing other community builders who are tapping into their ancestral lineage to guide how they do their work in the world, and those folks who are trying to build outside of these current structures.
Okay, thank you for that, Lee. What advice would you give those people who want to connect with their ancestors?
Yeah, I would say I have a couple pieces of advice. And first off, I want to clarify, because I've been saying ancestors a lot, just what I mean by that. For me, when I first started this work, it was more limited, I think, in my mind to kind of my direct ancestors who had started giving me messages. But as I've connected more, I've realized our ancestors are everything that gives us guidance on how we are a part of the whole ecosystem here on Earth. So, trees, animals, certain lands, and then our direct ancestors and other, like I've had ancestors of friends of mine visit me. I know Erika's had some of my ancestors visit her. So basically, any energy that helps us connect and remind us of our place in this larger system is what I guess what I would define it as. And then for those who want to connect, I really think it's important to get off of some of these devices and be in a space, if you can, in nature, even just, sitting in front of a plant. My grandma used to put a plant in front of me when I was little, whenever I was crying. And I guess that was the way it made me, she could get me to stop crying. Um,
Wow.
but
That's
I
beautiful.
am fortunate in the sense of, like, I know both sides of my family all the way back. And I've known where my grandparents come from, especially on my dad's side, the one grandparents' families who came from Sapmi and from Lapland. So, but what I like to let people know, because I've had many people ask me, but I don't even know where my lineage is from. How would I find out? And what I like to remind everyone is that I knew my entire life. I'm in my late 40s, and this only started happening about 5 years ago for me. It was not because I knew in the books or even from oral history. It was because I was in a place where I had no other distractions. I was
Mm.
sitting with other people who were already in nature, and boom, they started coming, right? And telling me what they had to teach me. And I got a lot of information through dreams and meditations that I would write down. And then 6 months later, I would look in a book or ask my dad and verify it because, I'm still a scientist and I need that verification. And that really helped. And then working with folks like Erika and other healers who can also see in other realms, and they would tell me what they saw, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's the guy from my dream. I don't know how many generations back he is, but that's how he presents himself to me as well. So I like to tell that to people because you don't need to know from the books. That's not how this knowledge and this connection happens. It's not how it historically happened. All we need to do is say, I'm ready to connect, and give them some guidance on how you would like to connect. Every night, I'm going to light a candle and sit with my cup of tea, or please come to me in my dreams. Or I like to walk and oftentimes ask for guidance or connection when I'm walking. Just ask and then be able to receive and listen.
Thank you. That's great. I love that you said that. If I may add, is that I think you got through your ego too, right? Like, I think in order for us to listen, is we have to get over that ego or feeling or looking and sounding weird because he does, right? Yeah.
One of my teachers told me, Lee, everyone talks about decolonization, but to actually live outside of these current structures and to remember other ways of being can border on feeling like a mental break. You are opening up yourself to so many more information fields. And so that's not also something to go into just la di da, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You're
So
right.
it's with a lot of personal responsibility and guidance. And I always like to remind folks of that as well. So, and Erika, you have a lot more experience with that than I do since you actually lead people in those spaces. Can you let us know what your suggestions are for anyone who would like to connect?
Yeah. And I'm gonna echo what you said also, just to clarify ancestry for me is it means the same thing to me. My I know my grandmother was a curandera, but other than that, I had no idea. When you are ready to be open and walk through that door of being here, like, okay, I'm ready to be that person or walk that path that you are asking me to walk, not knowing I'm going to make big money or no money at all. You have to know that you're doing this work out of the kindness of your heart and because you were here, you were born to do this, to walk this path. Because once you say yes and you walk through that door closes. I mean, it is completely gone. One of the things that happened to me, I was told, okay, now you're a curandera for my teachers. You can go practice. And then I got really scared and stopped for a whole year. Within a month or 2 months, I started feeling something weird. I, and I had I went to the doctor and it was fine. And then a year later, I came back after saying that I wasn't going to practice curanderismo because I was afraid I was going to be damaging people, not trusting myself. I had a tumor that grew within 1 year the size of a grapefruit.
Oh, right.
So we had to have surgery and all this kind of stuff. And this what I'm saying, not to scare people, right? Like, oh, don't do it anymore. But what I'm saying is be ready for you to say yes and then move forward. I mean, I'm okay now because I was like, oh, okay, just kidding. Let me go. I have the training. I gotta trust myself and I'll go because it's not about me or what I look like, but it's about you trusting the guides and come through you. You're just a tool and you're here guiding people or guiding yourself in this path and move forward, right? So I would say just be ready, be open and listen. It could be as simple as seeing a hummingbird to remind yourself of happiness. It could be a feather that reminds you to be light. It could be as simple as seeing a bird, like, oh my God, that reminds me of my guide. What am I supposed to do right now? It's a fine line that you walk to make sure that you stay balanced within yourself and give up that feeling of feeling weird or dumb or strange when you are saying what you're feeling. Be ready to walk that path
Mhm.
that they're asking you to walk. And don't worry about how you're going to look or sound to other people. As long as you're walking in that path, in that light, you're going to be guided to the right place where they need you at. So that's my advice for that. And ask around, like, hey, ask God, like, hey, how did you guys do it? Or what happens with this? Ask your neighbor, ask whoever you trust. Go ask a tree. I
Continue
do.
listening to the podcast, because that's what this podcast is for and about, is to help demystify connecting with our ancestors, connecting with other ways of knowing and being in the world in order to
Mhm.
build our lives, right? But really build for those of us who are doing our work in the world. And when we say our work in the world, we mean what we came here to do, not
Mhm.
necessarily what pays the bills or pays the rent. We will be interviewing a lot of people who are going through that process themselves. And our goal with this podcast is to demystify it, to show others, because I wanted a podcast like this 5 years ago. I was scared. I thought, if I go down this path, I'm going to be all alone. I'm going to be ostracized. And what has happened is, yes, I have had to lose a lot. And at the same time, I've gained a new community of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a good point that you bring up to end this, is that you will lose people that are not going to support you walking on this path, but you
Mhm.
will gain all those people that are going to support you while you walk on
Right.
this path. That was a beautiful surprise that I got. And that's how I met Julie.
Exactly. And we just
Yeah.
feel it's imperative at these times, especially with what we're living through, that
Yeah.
more of us feel the courage to walk these paths, to really remember and say, you know what, it may be difficult, but we are going to build outside of these current structures. We have
Yeah.
to. We
Yes.
have to.
Yeah. Thank you. And don't be afraid to step into your power. And like Lee said, this is why we're doing this. So you're going to hear a lot of people who have come from different backgrounds and found their path and guides. Please stay tuned to that. Tell people about this. Come and join us. Let us be one of those people that you gain as you walk in this path, because we're here
Yes.
for sure.
Yeah. We're all walking side by side.
Yay. Yes,
All
we are.
right. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to learn about both of us and what we're hoping to build with Building Beyond. And we'll
Yes.
look forward to introducing you to our next guest. We are going to be releasing these every 2 weeks.
Please follow us and spread the word of this so we can do this work together.
Until next time, Erika.
Okay, nos vemos.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'd love your help growing this community, so please hit subscribe or share this podcast with a friend. And if you've got topics you'd like to learn about or a guest you'd like to hear from on the show, please just drop me a message. My contact link is in the show notes. I really appreciate you helping us build beyond together.